Welcome to this episode of Spinnovation, where we have the honor of having Professor Magnus Mähring as a guest. Welcome, Magnus.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
You are a professor in digital innovation and entrepreneurship, and you have your professorship sort of like is named after Erling Persson, who was the founder of H&M, and I imagine his money is now what is sort of like funding you and all the researchers that you have employed and engaged in something called the House of Innovation based in Stockholm, Sweden.
Yes, that's right. Well, we have at the House of Innovation, which is part of the Stockholm School of Economics in Stockholm, we have the operations of the House of Innovation has several large external donations, and the Erling Persson Foundation is our largest donor, and my professorship is also connected to that donation. That's correct. So we also have donations. We have a research center with a donation called the Jacob and Marcus Wallenberg Research Center, and we also have a Scania Research Center.
And you're also closely related to or associated to the Stockholm Business School, Handelshögskolan.
Stockholm School of Economics, that's right. So the House of Innovation is the House of Innovation is part of the Stockholm School of Economics.
And when did all this start? When did you set up House of Innovation?
So it depends on how you count it, I guess. But the House of Innovation was started in 2018. And the background to that, it's not like we suddenly in 2018, we realized that it's important to research on these topics. We've been doing that for a long time. The big difference is really that we had this fortunate sort of confluence of events, right? We had growing interest in really the combination of innovation, entrepreneurship, and digitalization. That's one major aspect. And we saw that there were lots of really cool things happening because, you know, both in academia and also in practice, if you go back in time, we tended to think of entrepreneurship, innovation, and IT as three different things, right? So entrepreneurship, that was about how individual entrepreneurs started a new company, right? So innovation was about what the R&D departments in large firms were doing, and IT, that was what the guys, mostly guys in IT units in companies, what they were tinkering with. And all of this was sort of three different fields academically, and you can argue also practically. But what we're seeing these days, of course, is that all of these things are coming together. It's like, you know, when we look at our startup firms in our startup incubator called the SCDI Business Lab, those firms are entrepreneurial. They are always based on some form of innovation, be it technological, be it market related, be it a service process that is new and different, and they always have digital resources and capabilities at the core of their business model. So all of these things are coming together. So
So could you say that this business hub or incubator space at SSE that is kind of your petri dish where you do your research?
Well, I mean, we try to find the right balance where we don't want to treat the incubator only as a research environment, but we stay in good, close contact with the firms in the incubator, and we do look for opportunities to do research which is mutually beneficial. So, the most important thing for the incubator is to create new companies that create wealth in Sweden and beyond. But if we can do things together with them, we're happy to do that as well.
And I, as a former entrepreneur, I also view entrepreneurship definitely as it is innovation, in the sense that you go from just an idea or an invention perhaps, and bring it to the market so that people can use it. And basically that's the most common description of innovation. And so innovation is not a thing, it's a process, a step of actions that you take. And entrepreneurship is really innovation manifested usually maybe around one idea. And if you're larger companies, then maybe you need more ideas and you need to set up processes in order to foster more initiatives that can bring new stuff to implementation and to the markets. I think also it's I know that you have also been specializing in research regarding ecosystems for innovation.
Well, yeah, I think that's one of the new things we're doing is since a couple of years, we're interested in and sort of growing our activities in that space. And we're particularly interested in looking at ecosystems that are innovation ecosystems that are not sort of standard, that are a little bit different, so that we can see new things.
And let's just roll back the tape a little bit and just I just want to ask you, how did you end up as a professor of entrepreneurship and digital innovation?
Oh, wow. That's a super long story. I think the short version is that, well, the somewhat longer version is that a long time ago, when I was in senior secondary school, some friends of mine and I discovered an old computer in a closed room in our school, and no one was using it, and we tried to get this thing to work. And I guess I was for a while very fascinated with technology, but at the same time I was pursuing business studies, so I sort of became interested in the intersection there. And then I realized that intersections are things that people often are not encouraged to explore, right? Because, if you're a lawyer, you need to be good at law. If you're an accountant, you need to be good at accounting. And if you're a marketer, you need to be good at marketing. But what I saw at that time was that, if you look at what digital technologies can do, you need to mesh this sort of idea of how to, what we would now call innovate with digital technologies, with domain knowledge, right? If you don't have the domain knowledge, you're at a deficit. And if you don't have an idea about what the technology would be capable of doing, you're also at a disadvantage. So I got very interested in intersections, if you will. And that sort of drew, I went from there.
And I think that's a proof of sound judgment, because it seems also that a lot of so like within specific domains, a lot of research and knowledge, most of that has already been done within those. So the interesting stuff is now happening in the intersections between different intersections. And I also heard a couple of years ago that the number of so-called hyphen degrees is increasing steadily. Sort of like you're not only a computer scientist, you're actually a computer biology scientist. Right. So that's really interesting. But you caught that trend early on.
Yeah, I did. I wasn't aware it was a trend. I just saw something that was interesting.
I'm just speculating here.
Yeah, I got interested in those kinds of things early on, and then I went from there basically.
And how the House of Innovation, I mean, it's a super cool name, and I guess it piques people's interest when they first hear about it. What was the original thought behind that name, and if it also started as an idea from your side, how did you make that happen? Sort of like what kind of people did you need to convince that we need to set up this kind of research unit?
Well, I think so. First part, why the house and what's the philosophy behind it? I think it's really what I said before, is that the insight that so many things are sort of meshing together. So we need, I'm going to talk a little bit about the president of SSC, Lars Stranegård, and stealing. He sometimes quotes a saying that goes, "The world has problems, universities have departments." And this is a way to try to get beyond that, right? Rather than saying, we only do technology, we only do entrepreneurship, we only do innovation management. What we're creating is a cross-disciplinary environment which is therefore able to understand and respond to a lot more phenomena in the world around us. And another philosophy behind the house is, of course, that the Stockholm School of Economics has a very strong and very proud tradition of working closely together with its surroundings, with business and with other sectors of society. And that's something we wanted to create. And one way to create that is to create a sort of a larger, more open and more an environment that signals curiosity, and having multiple research centers, having an academic department to create sort of a solid foundation, having the incubator, the SSC Business Lab, etc., all in the same house, if you will. That creates a lot more interaction and a lot more meetings and a lot more opportunities to do things in a different way. So that's the philosophy behind it. And how did we make it happen? Well, I think I have to credit the foresight of Lars Stranegård in that respect, because I think what he saw was a number of stakeholders being interested in the same thing, and he found a way to center that attention on something that was doable for us. So I don't know. I'm sort of grasping a little bit for. There are some aspects of your question that I haven't answered, but maybe I'll let you pursue what you want to pursue there.
Yeah, what I was wondering when you mentioned that this is sort of like multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. What are the challenges of making that work? Because I'm just interjecting here first, because I think one of the challenges is that if you come from disparate or separate domains, usually those domains have a specific language and terminology.
Yes.
And have you sort of like stumbled upon that?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, academia, of course, I have great respect for academia. I think it's a business model that has been around for, depending on how you count, a couple of 1,000 years or so.
I love how you call it a business model. That's only from a professor at the Stockholm School of Economics.
Well, it's you can also call it an institutionalized field if you want to, but in any case, it's apparently it has worked for a long time, right?
For sure.
It's still around. It has a number of principles that have been around for a very long time. So I have great respect for that. But at the same time, of course, academia is very much built on you make a career by being very, very good at very few things, right? And most a lot of people in academia are absolutely convinced that the subject they're working on is the most important subject there is.
Of course.
And that it has to be that way, because otherwise you don't have the, the passion and tenacity to keep working on difficult things. So I think the key thing for us in creating a cross-disciplinary environment is to create a culture where we are allowed to be within our own disciplines, but we are required, if you will, we are expected to be always interested in and helpful in relation to our colleagues. So we build a very collegial environment, which is very inclusive, where people really are interested in helping each other excel. But we don't require everyone to be, always a hybrid, right? I can still write for the journals I want to write for. Yeah. But at the same time, someone from another discipline can help me articulate ideas, or suggest to me that there's a literature that I can use to improve what I'm doing. And then as we build that environment, we also see that cross-disciplinary collaborations happen. So that's part of the secret. Yeah, and I love how you phrase that, sort of like you are allowed to to continue working with your own yes. Domain, but required to be curious and interested in what your colleagues are up to. Yeah. I think that's a really, really good philosophy, and it's great that sort of like you can bring all these people. Because how many people are you now? How many researchers do you have, or associated researchers? Well, I didn't count today, but what was yesterday's head count? We're somewhere around 24 assistant, associate, and full professors. So roughly 5-6 full professors, around 4 associate, and around 8 or 10 assistant level professors, and we're probably around 18 PhD students. We will be in the fall, we will have around 6 postdocs. So that's the size, and a bunch of affiliated researchers, probably around 10-12. And we're also expanding our visiting professors program, so we look forward to that in the fall. Oh, nice. So that is your first batch then of postdocs coming out this autumn, or what? Well, the postdocs are sort of after PhD. You can do 2 years before you apply for assistant professorships. So we have at present 3 postdocs, and in the fall one of our postdocs will transition into another role, and we will have 4 new postdocs coming in. And those are 2-year positions. 3 of them, I have to say, we're very happy to have a grant together with Umeå University and Gothenburg University called the Wallenberg Digital Innovation Program. So 3 of those postdocs are recruited with that external funding. I want to move a little bit further here and delve into what, at least in my head, I was thinking of the main course in this buffet of knowledge, and that's innovation within ecosystems. And could you first explain to me and to the viewers what is meant by innovation in ecosystems? Well, that's a $1 million question, and this is very much a new knowledge domain, and clearly there are well-respected colleagues of mine who don't believe in ecosystems as a research idea, because clearly they are not from biology. True. Or maybe they know so much about biology to see too many differences. All right. Yeah. some people would say that, well, we already know a lot about interorganizational relationships, so why don't we continue that research? Or we already know about industry networks and clusters, so why don't we continue that research? I think the reason for the large interest in ecosystems right now and growing interest in ecosystems is that there is sort of a fluidity of connections between companies, right? So and between actors really. So and partly this has a lot to do with digital capabilities. The way we pursue innovation in companies has changed because we can now, there are mechanisms to trust an engineer in Indonesia to supply the design for a component in a complex industrial system, right? We didn't have those mechanisms maybe 25 years ago, but today we have a lot of mechanisms that allow us to do that. And we can 3D print a prototype and we can try it out. There's so many work processes that have changed using digital capabilities to change how open the company is to innovation from the pulling in innovation from the outside, right?
So this sorry, this is not just a new label on something that has been around forever. This is actually a new situation or context.
I think it's a very, very helpful concept and idea to think about something which has fluidity and strength at the same time, right? Because whether you're an individual or whether you're a company, you can today create new ties, and you can change your ties more fluidly and more organically, if you will, than you maybe could in the past, right? So, and what we're also seeing then connected to this is that the pace of innovation makes companies more willing to take risks on pursuing innovation in settings that have not been contractually structured, right? So, if you go back some years, people would start with, we don't want to give away our IP, our intellectual properties. So before we start the collaboration, we need to have our lawyers draw up a contract. Or, we can only collaborate with these people if we don't share anything with them. And today, the view of how we innovate is much more open and much more sharing oriented. And that means that companies are also willing to take more risks and take more chances and try out what works. And I think the ecosystem concept helps us understand and approach a world that looks like that, if you will.
And also, it seems like this is also almost like a natural evolution also in the way things is progressing in the world, in the sense that the need for speed, so to speak, when it comes to innovation only increases. And so if there are new openings and new ways of doing that, I guess that is also one of the drivers placing the companies in these new contexts and these new ways of working.
Yes, absolutely. And the speed of technological innovation is also such that we cannot rely on internal innovation driving us to the forefront, right? We need to. A common example is that if even NASA is not relying on internal innovation to drive their development, why should regular companies do that, right? They're also increasingly they are also solution seekers rather than problem solvers, right? They ask others to solve their problems for them, and that's a major shift in how we think about innovation.
In many companies, of course, or hopefully, they have an innovation strategy, and there can be many parts in such strategy, but does anyone today have an innovation strategy labeled sort of like our ecosystem innovation strategy?
Well, I think probably, well, I'm sure there are companies that have that. I'm, dependent, regardless of what they call it. I'm convinced that there are companies that are very deliberately thinking of themselves as being part of an ecosystem or an innovation ecosystem in this case, and how they sort of leverage and utilize that position that they have. So yeah, I'm sure. So are most companies very mature in this? No.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like breaking new ground for most of the companies and organizations out there, as well as the individuals sort of like responsible for working with these issues. And do you get a lot of interest from the industry or the business sector regarding your research?
Yes, yes, we do. I think we are very much in contact with and in dialogue with a number of companies and other actors. So I would say that part of the reason that we're working on these topics is because we see that these topics are important, right? So fortunately, when we talk about these topics and when we interest ourselves for these topics, we also get a good response. But if we didn't, that would be a sign that we don't know what we're doing in the first place, so to speak.
Yeah, but at the same time, isn't there an interesting sort of like tension here that is probably necessary, but also sort of like between, let's say, applied research and more theoretical research, and I guess you have to walk on that knife's edge, so to speak, to be relevant to the industry, but also to make sure that you actually are breaking new ground.
Yes, I agree. I think you summarized the answer to it, but I think
I don't need any guests. I'll just summarize all the answers.
You just ask the question and just it's much more efficient. We've talked about speed, right? So, but I think yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So our job as researchers is to do both, right? And I firmly believe in the importance of theoretical and methodological depth and rigor. I don't think that the problem of academia is that we're doing things that are too complicated. I think if there's anything that is a problem, I think it's the translation process, right? So our job is to do things that take a lot of time, right? We don't write a paper in 3 weeks. We may have 4 years from the start of data collection to publication, or 5 years, right? So, but that's our job and that's how we work. But what we also need to do is translate and interact, right? And so in our case, we do that a lot through research collaborations, through webinars and seminars, through conferences, through various ways where we create arenas where we have a dialogue with people who face urgent problems. And we support what we can, we provide what we can, and we also collect new insights that we can bring back to our slow research, so to speak. So different cadences or different speeds in different cycle times, at least in practice and academia. But as long as you bridge them, you can be good at both things. You can contribute to both things.
I remember a former boss of mine, he used to say something along the lines that academia turns money into knowledge, but then you have the sort of like industrial research institutes, they turn knowledge into money, or help the industry turn knowledge into money. So, right. So those are two sides of the same coin, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have, I mean, as a research area, I guess, I mean, innovation in ecosystems, maybe it was called something different before. It's not super new, but it's not super old. But you, I think you mentioned before we did this episode that you have, maybe you want to look at this and maybe you have a slightly different view than most people involved within this area.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things that I think that one can do to approach this from different angles. I mean, one way, so let me take a couple of examples. One is sort of the innovation ecosystem and also platform-based ecosystems literature, which are, or topics which are related. And another topic has to do with, what is digital technology? What does digital technology mean for us? And how do we change together with digital technologies in our lives, in our workplaces, etc. And I think in both cases, in the first case, it's very simple. And of course, innovation ecosystem is one of the research areas that we are working on, and one of the research areas that I'm relatively newly investing more time in. But one thing that we see very much is that at present, a lot of the research in this area is very focused on almost ideal types. You look at, when it comes to platform ecosystems, you look at the big players, which are well established and very successful. But we think that in order to advance our knowledge on platform-based ecosystems, we need to move beyond those that sort of invented the idea of two-sided markets, digitally based markets, and think much more about industry transformation in established industries and how that will happen. And there we believe a lot more in, we're very interested in collaborative ecosystem formation, both in how innovation ecosystems come together to solve a problem, and how those innovation ecosystems can create can transform industries, right? Or transform part of how an industry works. So we like to sort of make things more complicated, if you will, in order to find where the future value creation will occur. And we believe that there are lots of things happening right now that has to do with the green transformation, the green transition, and that will drive a lot of innovation in ecosystems, we believe.
But maybe I'm taking or drawing my own conclusions there a little bit too far, but could you view it as sort of like the traditional view on ecosystems and the big platforms we have out there? Those are usually created by one market actor or player.
Right.
So it's sort of like you have your own, you build your own greenhouse and a little ecosystem within that greenhouse. But what you're talking about is a bit more organic, sort of like different entities growing in the same forest or on the same planet, and starting interacting with each other in a more spontaneous way, maybe, even if there might also be intention behind it.
Oh, absolutely. And that makes it much more interesting and much more complicated because, a lot of the big players, they were fortunate enough to see a market opportunity where they could define what roles others were going to play. But a lot of companies in incumbent firms in existing industries, they don't have the luxury to decide what the other players are going to do, right? Because they're not in that situation. They're not creating something from scratch. So that means that we have to understand collective shaping of ecosystems in much more detail than we know right now. So I think that's an interesting topic.
But it also sounds like it's not a trivial challenge, right? To do research on that.
No, and we're early in this, so we don't know how this will pay off yet, but it's not the only thing we're doing. We also have a little bit of portfolio thinking, right? So I mean, we also do stuff like the other thing that I wanted to talk about, connected to your question earlier, is really understanding what technologies and humans are doing together. And I think they're, going back a lot in time, I think, understanding humans and technologies as sometimes very deeply intertwined and not as separate things that are independent of each other is very important. And one thing that we repeatedly do, and we're doing it right now, is we sort of extrapolate from our current situation. So right now, in the pandemic, a lot of people have said, oh, we've digitalized so quickly in the last weeks or months or so, right? And that's true, but the continued evolution will not be linear. There's a lot of generativity that takes place in the combination of people and technologies. We sort of invent and reinvent how we interact with technologies and what we're able to do with them. And this is also this is a very also in a way an organic process. At least it's a process which is deliberate but also very emergent. So we need to, I think one key to understand to innovation is to understand emergence and how one development creates reactions rather than how one development only creates momentum, if you will.
And I think at least this gets me thinking of Marshall McLuhan, who of course is famous for the medium is the message. But also, I mean, he hypothesized or claimed that any technology is just an extension of the human body or the human mind. So knives are just better claws. A car is just stronger, faster legs, stuff like that. And I definitely I buy into that. And also, but stuff happens when we start interacting with technology, right? And it actually transformed. It can be extremely transformative. And one example that really struck me was before we had writing. You can imagine the lives in villages. I don't even know, maybe even small cities, maybe, I don't know. But where you are part of a group, where the only communication is through voice and speech. And if you had any different opinions that maybe was not mainstream and maybe even threatening to the rest of your group, they would either kill you or expel you, right? But with the invention of writing, all of a sudden, you could actually express your thoughts and opinions anonymously. Not only spread them, but actually express them anonymously. And that's, I think, is one of the main and maybe even overlooked aspects of writing, actually, which we don't think about today. But it must have been a tremendous shift in social relationships once you could actually do that.
So the disconnect of the body from the idea, right? The idea can travel without the body.
That's one part of it, but also being able to do that anonymously in that case. So, I mean, the large case is the one you mentioned, but also the specific thing there in being able to actually express opinions without having to fear for your life, because you can be anonymous. Before that, you couldn't be anonymous unless you were wearing, maybe a costume or something.
So you're saying that in a sense, Russian bots on Twitter are just the logical extension of Gutenberg.
Well, I mean, I guess you could put it that way. And it's sort of like, what I mean is that whenever we develop a new technology, it always has unforeseen consequences.
That's true. That's true.
And it's really,
it transformed what we consider to be normal, and that's I think is also super interesting, is the sort of the normalization that we engage in that becomes the basis for the next step in innovation, right? There's so many things we take for granted, and those things that we take for granted are both the basis of how we continue to innovate, but they're also, they provide a lot of potential for being questioned, right? Do we really need to do things this way? And therefore there's probably a lot of fertile soil for innovation and questioning some of the things we take for granted.
And I mean, a thing like this, I mean, we're having this conversation via online video. It's totally unnatural, and
we're naturalizing it, so to speak.
I mean, for us,
normal,
it's just
right. We're
normal.
Normalizing it.
Yes,
we're normalizing it, and that's a fantastic capability of humans, I think, is normalizing strange things, right?
For sure, and there has been these interesting experiments that you add sort of like new and synthetic senses, for instance, like being able to see ultraviolet or feeling magnetic fields and stuff like that. There is a whole cadre of biohackers doing that, inserting sensors into the fingertips and stuff like that at the kitchen table with a knife and some sterilizing equipment. But our brain is obviously, of course, capable of handling a lot of different sensory inputs and try to make sense of it, and that extends, of course, also to technology. That and just as Marshall McLuhan said, it becomes just an extension of us that we just integrate into our experience and behavior somehow.
Yeah. I guess. Thank you. I'm going to go home and think more about that. My brain is engaging in trying to falsify the idea that all inventions or innovations are just extensions of our bodily capabilities.
I'm sure you can probably find some exceptions, but it's a useful framework, right?
Oh yeah, it is. What I'm wondering is if new technologies make that sort of falsify that way of thinking, and I don't have the answer to that. I guess it depends on how creative you are in reinterpreting things as related to yourself, right?
Yeah, of course, of course. But I mean, if we take like one of my friends, he's real Elon Musk buff, and with this Neuralink, for instance, this effort of basically connecting our brains in new ways to either new equipment or sensory input, or even to other brains. This seems super strange, but it's also just an extension of our minds, right? And allowing it to meld with other stuff.
So what is the circular economy in that sense? Then, if you think about steel production, which doesn't produce carbon dioxide, or you think about carbon capture, how are those technologies extensions of our abilities to affect our environment with our bodies?
Well, at least it's sort of like I think they're just like vacuum cleaners. You actually need to keep a clean home in order not to get sick and die. So in a sense, it's just an adaptation of behavior, maybe.
Yeah, I think what's also interesting about what you're mentioning here is of course the connection to our big challenges, right? The grand challenges, because the grand challenges, they defy our, let's assume that we think about innovation very much in relation to our own bodies and our own selves. So what the grand challenges pose to us is, of course, the need to innovate and solve problems that are on a humankind level and not on an individual level, right?
Mm.
We are asked now by the circumstances of our existence to innovate, to solve problems at a time where we will not be alive anymore, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And that, of course, is being often touted as one of the major obstacles to a green transformation of industry and society. The fact that it's beyond our comprehension in relation to ourselves as individuals, and it requires us to think collectively.
Yeah, and I think that's I don't necessarily think it's a new thing, but I think it's a super important thing and a very important perspective on probably innovation in ecosystems is the only route or way out of the predicament we are in now. But you know,
it might be an important factor, and thank you for bringing it back to something I pretend to know something about, because I was a little bit concerned here for a while that you're interviewing the wrong person. You should be interviewing someone who knows how to solve the climate challenge, and unfortunately I don't.
No, but I just want to say about this. I don't want to take it into that domain specifically, but this thing about long-term thinking and how to collaborate about that. And I've always been fascinated by, you know, these old trees surrounding a road up to, you know, a farm or a mansion or something like that. You know, those were planted maybe 100, 200, 300 years ago. And I just admire that kind of foresight that, you know, someone is planting those and not expecting to see them, him or herself, but just for future generations. And somehow we got lost there in our recent technological
I mean,
craze.
I guess that's one of the arguments for active leadership, right? I mean, that's, if you think about family businesses, which is also one of our research areas at the House of Innovation, although it's not one of my areas of expertise. But if you think about family businesses and you think about sort of multi-generational ownership, then that's the stewardship idea is very strong in many cases there, right? So I think that's one of the strong arguments for multi-generational ownership, and is the sense of ownership and the sense of contribution to society and being in it for the long term is really important things. And you could argue, you know, connecting to Swedish industry and is that, you know, we have quite a lot of firms that are very innovative but have been around for a very long time. And I would, you know, I think it's fair to argue that many of those firms also have as part of their culture an idea of paying it forward, if you will, not just cashing in today, but really thinking long term.
But it's and I think that's definitely necessary for a long-term working society and a world even, right? But coming to that though, I mean, for sure, I mean, Sweden is we've always been exceptionally good and hitting far above our weight class in terms of producing both businesses and athletes and music, for instance. But I was thinking about, and this I guess is for many large companies all around the world, sort of like they really, many of them sort of like really capitalized on the shift that the industrial revolution made more than 100 years ago, maybe even as far back as 150 years ago. And I think it's still too early to say, you know, how successful they will be after this digital transformation maybe has progressed a bit further. I'm not saying that it ever will be done actually, but what's your view on that?
What's my view on sort of the survival
on the
capability
survival,
of the incumbent firms, or?
Yeah, exactly. In terms of sort of like they really capitalized on a former major shift,
right?
And now we have a new major shift.
Yeah, well, that's another great question.
Sorry for all the questions.
If only we knew, right?
Yeah.
This is sort of the question where
that's why you exist.
You only have to be right about that once, and then you can retire.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not expecting any answers here. I'm just thinking.
No, but let's explore it a little bit. Okay, so first of all, I think, yes, of course, we have a lot of firms that, can be traced back 100 years or 150 years. But if you look at what they're doing, many of them have been very innovative since then, right? So they have from their origins, they have thrived by repeatedly innovating, and quite a few of them have shifted their base technologies and their what sectors of industry that they are actually most active in, and so forth. So there's reason to have a lot of respect for the power of innovation in incumbent firms based on their broad and deep competence bases and their resources, right? And at the same time, of course, we also see firms that are not able to make the transition. And those are often very public examples, like Kodak or Nokia, which of course now has a new infrastructure business. But the Nokia we knew before the screen-based smartphones came around is another example of a hugely successful companies that stumbled very publicly and in a way which I guess is shocking for a lot of people. So you're asking, what will happen next? So another way to frame that question is, will Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos own all industries in the future? And because maybe that was not your question.
No,
or to put it differently, will the digital capabilities of a company like Google be enough to overtake more and more other industries?
Yeah, but I'd that's also a super interesting question. But I'd actually like to rephrase it, maybe in your own one of the topics also that you touched upon, and that I also want to delve deeper into. So maybe we can bring back the discussion on track here. But I think this is just so great fun to talk to in this way. But you
I
have
was
this,
also thinking about that actually. Please go ahead.
Because we were going to discuss non-linear development, and you sort of briefly touched upon that. And I mean, one of the presumptions there, I mean, linear development is sort of like not only that you're moving forward in a what you think is a straight trajectory, but also basically you can look in the back mirror, and sort of like just extrapolate from what you have there, right? And I think we're doing that fallacy now when we're thinking about these incumbents and how they will adapt and so forth, but all of a sudden you actually have these, and some will stumble, of course, but I think we have a sort of like a bias of thinking that something that already exists and is huge and have great resources should be able to adapt. But when I phrase it like that, it does really sound like the dinosaurs, and we know how it their fate, right? And I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm just, I think this is such an interesting that you can look at this from so many ways, but I don't think that there's anything is certain, and not even the survival of Amazon and Google, because everything will reach its limit eventually, and there will be. They are already almost like incumbents. It's just that they have so much still left to eat. So they will thrive for a good while more, and maybe they have some more also DNA built in for actually handling transitions. But I don't know. I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, well, I was a little bit thinking of finding a way back to things that are closer to my research, so that I don't exhibit what I sometimes call professor's disease, which is defined as the erroneous belief that you must be good at everything because you're reasonably good at one thing. I try to watch myself so I don't have opinions about everything and they sound like I know what I'm talking about.
No, of course I understand.
But you're asking about incumbents versus industry transformation and new entrants, and of course there's a lot of research on that, and obviously there are all shades of all colors of the rainbow in terms of how incumbents are doing in relation to new entrants. I think what makes, sort of to connect back a little bit to innovation ecosystems and platform-based ecosystems, what makes things right now interesting is that you can suddenly play potentially a major role in an industry by entering the industry with capabilities that become important from a different industry, right? So one of the things that I'm very curious about is if you look at postal agencies, state-owned postal agencies who have been shipping letters and parcels for centuries, right? And then you look at the logistics capabilities of a company like Amazon, which interconnects a number of independent actors into a distribution network, which is suddenly just creates a whole nother level of capability in terms of deciding how, the options you have, how fast you can get something, in what time frame you can get it delivered, with what traceability and with what predictability, and the information that you provide to the customer. So I think if you think about, if you have that type of logistics capability, what could you do to industries where logistics are important? That's, I think, an interesting aspect, right? Because I think that type of development of capabilities in different industries they provide the latent, they provide potentially provide opportunities for external actors to enter industries and even take potentially dominant roles in existing industries. And I think we have more of those sort of industry intersectional, I don't know what to call them, but sort of cross-industry capabilities, right? Capabilities that can be repurposed for an entirely different type of operation.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting, I think that's an interesting development, and I think that's something to look out for, obviously.
Yeah, that's super interesting. We have always been at the almost been at this for an hour. I want to conclude. I mean, we have so much to discuss. Maybe we'll have to do another episode in the future. But I just want to conclude with this interaction between humans and technology, and because you just recently wrote an article about refugees and the importance of certain technologies for them.
That's an interesting shift, I think, of the conversation. But thanks for bringing that up. So yeah, so I had the pleasure of being part of a team with Lotta Haltin at SSC, Marcus Göransson, who's at the Defense University, and Lucas Introna, who's at Lancaster University. And we did a study of Syrian refugees in tented settlements in Lebanon, and looked at sort of their domestic organizing practices. You know, how do you, the main thing is really, how do you not only survive, but how do you protect your sense of being a person, if you will, in very dire circumstances. And you know, one of the things, I don't want to make this a story about smartphones, but one of the things that we did see is sort of the smartphone as a way to invite people into to interact with and to recognize you as a human. So you know, I think what was interesting there, potentially, if we talk about the intersection of digital technologies and people, is how very human their use of technology was, if you will, right? How that it serves very important fundamental human needs, and it creates a basis for them to become recognized as subjects or as individuals, if you will. So the way we interact with each other through technology has profound importance for how we see ourselves and how we are being seen by others. And I hesitate to use the word tool, because I think one of the important things here is to go beyond the tool mindset and think about technologies as part of our practices and as being intertwined into our, or being immersed into our practices with ourselves. And that's what we looked at in this particular context.
I think this is such a good ending to a great discussion, because I interpret what you're saying now is sort of like we actually, being human also involves technology. Whether or not we like that or not, it's sort of like just part of the human condition, is that we always need and come up with new technologies in order just to have our existence here in this world.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, you know, looking for what it means to be human is interesting to do in relation to technologies. And I think I think it's interesting and important to do that beyond the obvious, right? And it's interesting. And one of my, you know, when I do webinars with right now, when I teach online, so to speak, I often comment on our increased abilities to interpret social cues through small Zoom windows, right? We used to have this idea that we need to meet in order to really meet, right? Because there's so many rich social cues that happen when we meet. But suddenly, I think we're all becoming much better at interpreting each other in small two-dimensional screen windows. And so we're sort of micro-innovating what it means to create human connections through something that is forced upon us by circumstances and enabled by digital technologies. And in a way, I think, you know, these refugees in very precarious circumstances, they are also doing that. They're finding the practices that are available to them, and they are engaging in those practices. And some of those practices involve technologies in ways that are profoundly important for them as human beings.
Thanks, Magnus, for a super interesting conversation. Looking forward to talk more to you both online and offline. Good luck with continue the construction of the House of Innovation, and take care. Thank you for all your insights and knowledge today.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Hope this was useful. Thanks.